All right, good morning and welcome to Counterpoints. We're not going to talk about the elections much in this show today, so let's get through a couple of those real quickly. Friend of the show, Will Stancil.
You just gave him that title on the spot.
House Representative race in Minnesota. If the way that you know that you're too online, whether or not you got that reference, this is a guy who made a career the last decade out of annoying people on Twitter and parlayed that into a run for Minnesota State House. He lost by maybe 600 votes or so, which is a landslide in a Minnesota House race.
Respectable.
But also in Minnesota, Ilhan Omar thumped Don Samuels.
Not even close. Yep.
Yeah.
Nothing like what happened to Cori Bush. AIPAC stayed out of that race basically as well.
There was a lot of money that funneled through AIPAC representatives to the campaign, which was reported in the last couple of days. It looked actually in violation of FEC rules. There are no such things as FEC rules anymore, so it won't get prosecuted. But yes, AIPAC itself stayed out. The super PAC stayed out. Ilhan Omar won comfortably.
Do you think that's because they like having Ilhan Omar? They would rather have Ilhan Omar as their sort of foil than totally take
No,
her.
I think it's they don't like to lose, and they thought that they would. And I think AIPAC and the NRA are similar in the sense that they survive significantly on their reputation of invincibility and of all-powerfulness, that if they come into a race, if you cross them, they will finish you.
So they pick and choose.
And so, therefore, they can't come into a race and lose. Because then other people are like, wait a minute, maybe I can challenge AIPAC and survive. So they really don't want to take any L's.
Makes sense.
Which although they have. They lost to Dave Min. But that was such a weird race. People are like, people didn't even know what to make of that. This California Democratic primary where they went after a guy who was totally pro-Israel.
So, yeah, interesting. And they should hope they don't go the way of the NRA because times are not good for the NRA. But we're sort of light on 2024 content today because it's the eye of the storm right now. Everyone's preparing for the DNC. We are, of course, going to cover Tim Walz right at the top of the show. He gave a pretty interesting speech yesterday. And there was news on the labor front, given what Donald Trump said to Elon Musk. And Crystal and I covered some of that yesterday. We're going to cover developments out of Iran. Ryan has an incredible story. Dropsite has an incredible story about something that happened in the West Bank. We are getting inflation numbers as we record this right now, bright and early. And then we have an interesting media block because some on the left are now speculating about the pro-Republican mainstream media. So we'll have a good conversation about that, I think, Ryan.
Yes, it reminds me of 2016 where the entire kind of Democratic infrastructure was persuaded that the mainstream media was basically in the tank for either in the tank for Trump politically or because they just loved the ratings. And there's just something about Hillary Clinton that the media and
just
also
absolutely, that's their contention, at least. So let's start with Tim Walz. We will be at the DNC, of course. The whole Breaking Points team, you're probably aware, will be at the DNC next week, broadcasting every single day. Tim Walz will be giving a speech at the DNC. Obviously, Biden is on Monday. We just learned that Pete Buttigieg is getting a primetime slot. I think he's going to be speaking on Wednesday. All of the Democratic celebrities will be there, and we'll be there to cover it all.
Wednesday, that's a setup. That was Barack Obama's position in 2004.
And he's speaking.
Which he used to launch. Buttigieg is a very strong Obama impression.
Yes.
So we'll see.
Obama will be speaking as well, obviously at Chicago, so it's sort of his home turf. So we will be there covering it with Crystal and Sagar and the whole gang. Make sure to stay tuned for that. But while Washington, D.C. really awaits convention season and then Labor Day, and after that, it is just the last stretch, the home stretch of this race, Tim Walz gave a speech yesterday. And let's start, Ryan, first of all, could you tell us maybe about the significance of Walz talking to this union?
So making one of his first big campaign events, or his first solo campaign event with a union, is sending a signal that we love to see. He's speaking at the AFSCME conference, which is the Federation of County, State, Municipal Employees, a lot of government workers. These are
it's huge, though, right?
Massive national labor union, makes up a significant part of the backbone of organized labor. Teachers, I saw some stat that teachers gave more money than basically any other profession to the Harris-Walz ticket after Walz, who was in a teachers union himself, was named to the ticket. very reliable Democratic voting base. And when it comes to, intra-union politics, government employees who are in a union are about the most reliable Democratic votes that you're going to get. But to see him broadly making the case for labor unions generally in such a full-throated way is different than we're used to getting from Democrats even at campaign time.
And he kind of made a point about that. Let's start with this first clip of Tim Walz yesterday.
I happen to be the first union member on a presidential ticket since Ronald Reagan. But rest assured, I won't lose my way. Probably should be a few more union members in elected office, President Saunders. We might want to work at that. I think I'm looking at some. So you heard the story. You knew Vice President Harris grew up in a middle-class family, picked up shifts at that McDonald's as a student. I keep asking this to make a contrast here. Can you simply picture Donald Trump working at a McDonald's trying to make a McFlurry or something? Oh, he knows us. He couldn't run that damn McFlurry machine if it cost him anything. So Vice President Harris and I have both had the privilege of joining workers on the picket line. And it's why, as governor, I signed one of the biggest packages of pro-worker policies in history into law. In Minnesota, we made it easier for workers to form unions. We strengthened workers' protections. And yes, we banned those damn captive audience meetings for good in Minnesota. Last time I said that at a union meeting, they sued me over it. It was the best thing to get sued over I ever said.
And so labor Twitter was losing its mind over that.
Loving it.
Just absolutely loving it. The captive meetings, if you've ever been in one, it's your boss sits you and your coworkers down and they tell you, hey, you may have heard something about this union drive going on in the company. Let me tell you why it's such a terrible idea. And they are incredibly effective. It's a way to dish out a whole bunch of threats to workers. It's a way to spew a whole bunch of lies. Over the years, we've done a ton of reporting where we've just, workers often record them and then send them to the press. And it's just absolute fear-mongering and a pack of lies to try to get them to vote down the unions. And so for Walz to be so familiar with them, to have, I don't know the back story of him getting sued for talking about it. Labor law is wild. You can get sued all over the place for violating it. Which Donald Trump and Elon Musk are finding out, which we can talk about in a second. But for him to be that kind of familiar with it and also angry about it is super exciting to people. But what was your reaction to seeing him tell so much of a labor story? Well,
yeah, I mean, first of all, I think he's really, really good at that. There's no denying it. He's a talented politician. I think he's a good surrogate for her to be able to go to the conference in Los Angeles and speak the language of workers directly to them. He has a lot of energy right now. Also, he feels like, similar to Kamala Harris, he's got that. He's got the vibes right now. He's feeling good. They're feeling like they have the momentum, and it shows in the way that they're speaking. So, I think it's a really bad split screen. We're going to get to this in a moment with the Trump-Elon Musk conversation. I don't know that I agree with the McFlurry point, because I think it's probably hard for everyone to make a McFlurry. That's my one.
Those machines are breaking constantly too. It's not the workers' fault.
Clearly we all would have problems making McFlurries. There's something going on with the McFlurry machine.
Smart workers break those machines on purpose so that you don't have to deal with them anymore. So I also wanted to get your take on this next clip where he tries to thread together his cultural politics, social politics, and material and labor politics. I'm not even going to bias it ahead of time. Let's just roll.
Why would you think I need your advice to tell me what books I can and cannot read, or when to have a family, or how to have a family, or what religion to worship, or how to organize? You stay in your lane and I'll stay in mine. That's not that difficult.
So he's taking the freedom and the mind your own business line theme and applying it to labor protections. Like, don't have the government go in and side with the bosses to squash a union. I love the effort.
Well, I was going to say, I have a lot of substantive rebuttals to that, but I guess those are...
be?
Well, I would say, for example, I mean, his COVID policies are a huge, they hugely undermine his,
The freedom agenda was not a full display during COVID.
Yes, his respect for civil liberties,
freedom to live.
Like many people's respect for civil liberties, had a momentary lapse. And understandably at first, given the level of the emergency and what we didn't know, but then continued on into the future. So I think that's, that would be one big substantive rebuttal. Another one would be, Tim, nobody's telling you that you can't read these weird porn books. They're just saying, like, please keep them out of my child's library, meaning you stay in your lane and stop putting these, like, weird books in these libraries, these K through 12 libraries. And we've talked about this a lot before, but those are just, like, two off the top of my head that I would say. What I was going to mention, though, is I think my substantive rebuttals are sort of less important in the context of the question you asked, because politically, I think it's really smart. I think in America, anytime you can successfully make the sort of get out of my lane, stay in your lane, mind your own damn business. Anytime you can successfully, energetically, and sharply make that argument as a politician, it's really powerful because that's kind of the American spirit.
There you go.
Stay in your lane.
There you go.
Not you. You can swerve all you want.
It's all right. I'll stay in my lane. I love, but I do love the effort to at least talk about organized labor and workers in the same context as the culture war, because the culture war has for so many years been used to distract away from it. And to try to connect those two things and to say, look, these same people that are coming after your books and coming after you in the doctor's office are also going to come at you in the workplace. And are going to make it impossible for you to freely organize together and demand more dignity and protection and higher wages.
Which is so interesting because, again, on the right, there's the sense that the wealthy class, the sort of billionaire, multi-millionaire class that donates to political campaigns, the sense is they have no interest in the culture war. It's not true of every billionaire, of course. And what Walz is using is those sort of powerful interests who are very much into the red meat of the culture war and tying them together politically because they also happen to be the same people that are anti-union. I mean, that is correct, that some of those wealthy, powerful interests really are. I think there aren't many of them that really want to lean hard into the culture war, but some of them do. And if you can tie that together, I do think it's powerful. And another thing I just wanted to mention.
It's real, yeah. I think it's a fair.
There's something there. And another thing I wanted to mention is that him speaking the language of organized labor so fluently, and I think personally, reminds me a lot of how conservatives feel about J.D. Vance, in that he speaks the language of the new right, the kind of the conservative movement, not the old conservative movement, but new people. Like he uses the same words. He's singing from the same hymn book is probably the best way to put it. And it's kind of interesting that both VP picks have that connection with such a big part of their bases.
Yes.
Because that doesn't always happen.
Right, and it comes right after this massive own goal, what I would call a massive own goal from Donald Trump during Elon Musk's interview. Let's roll this clip. This is the one I've seen circulating the most, but might just be my own ecosystem. But Democrats were, I think, over the moon when they heard this from these two billionaires, and we're among the first to start pushing it around. So here's Elon Musk and Donald Trump.
I mean, I look at what you do. You walk in and you just say, you want to quit? They go on strike. I won't mention the name of the company, but they go on strike and you say, that's okay, you're all gone. You're all gone. So every one of you is gone and you are the greatest. You would be very good. Oh, you would love it.
Speaking of Ronald Reagan, that was sort of Trump admiring the Reagan and Elon Musk.
And interesting again, because Trump has a significant base of support from members of organized labor.
Like Reagan.
Yeah, like Reagan. Right. I mentioned on the show earlier that in the 1980 campaign against Jimmy Carter, the Air Traffic Controllers Union endorsed Ronald Reagan. Yeah. And then he literally destroyed them. And so, organized labor has a long memory. And the air traffic controllers were a reactionary union of mostly like white guys in their 40s and 50s. And if you can imagine that in like the 1980, like that's a pretty right-wing, like cultural block of voters.
Yeah.
And so that's why they voted against their kind of more obvious material interests in supporting, Jimmy Carter, who would come one vote short of like a union reform bill that it was, the most sweeping thing we would have ever had passed in the country. Everybody thought, oh, we'll get that next cycle, and it never happened. And instead, the wave kind of washed the unions back to sea. But yeah, so they felt like, Reagan's speaking our language culturally. We'll go with him. And so, but Reagan was smart enough to never say before the election that he was going to fire everybody. he did it after he won. Trump has also now drawn a labor complaint from the UAW.
And this, by the way, is a huge, not by the way, and Brian, you're like the best person to talk to about this. I feel like this is a pretty huge moment in the campaign. And it felt during that rambling 2+ hour Twitter conversation or space conversation on X that a lot of it just was going to fade into the ether, and we were never going to remember some of these moments again. And it didn't break a ton of news, even though they had some interesting tangents that they went down or roads that they went down. But this one actually might really stick, because the one thing I saw get under Democrats' skin this election so far, maybe the biggest thing, was Sean O'Brien speaking at the RNC. I mean, that was brutal. And Sean O'Brien has now said that doing what Trump lauded in response to his comments, what he lauded Elon Musk for doing is, quote, economic terrorism.
Right.
Basically called Trump an economic terrorist.
Yeah, so to fire, it is, first of all, it's illegal to fire workers who are out on strike. It is also a violation of labor law to threaten to fire workers for going on strike, which is why the UAW, which is trying to unionize some, Elon Musk plants, is filing a labor complaint, saying basically what you have done is you have quite rather explicitly, even if Trump said, I'm not going to mention the company, like, come on, we're all morons here. Even if you don't mention the company, it's quite explicit that he's saying that he's willing to fire workers who try to organize a union at Tesla. And so the UAW files a complaint, and it makes Sean O'Brien and the Teamsters president look like a fool for having given Republicans that olive branch. And it was such an unnecessary thing to say. Like,
right. He's riffing.
Just riffing. Like, who did that line appeal to that was already not 100% in both of their camps?
But he was just riffing. They were literally just having a conversation, which is such an unusual thing.
You're going to have a conversation.
I know, but
to Musk's credit, it was. He said, like, a conversation is going to be more revealing, and sure enough.
They're both clearly people who are more interested in having these, like, literal conversations than reading off of scripts, to their credit. That sometimes is not great for their campaigns or their businesses or whatever, but it does give us, as the public, good insight psychologically into how they are approaching these issues, which Trump, it's about strength, right? Like, just you're done with them. You're the boss, and you're going to act like the boss. But the Sean O'Brien thing, I wonder, Ryan, if this antagonizes him, because he took so much heat for speaking at the RNC, and now he gets this comment from Trump, looks like it makes him look like a fool, to your point. So does he, does he come out even harder? Does he start pushing against Republicans and against Trump? Because now he's in this position and he's probably extremely mad about it.
I think what he'll do is he'll read the tea leaves, because he was making several plays here. One is there's an understanding, whether it's accurate or not, among labor unions that if the second Trump administration comes into office, that there will be an effort to take on organized labor, to dismantle organized labor power in a significant way. And so O'Brien was trying to get ahead of that and say, okay, you can go after everybody else, but don't go after the Teamsters, because look, you love the Teamsters, we got hard hats, we're good for you, and look, we didn't even support the Democrats in the election, so please don't put us up against the wall with everybody else. That was the one path. The separate path was his own internal politics within the Teamsters union. He's up for re-election. There are a lot of Trump supporters in the Teamsters union.
Yeah, and there still will be.
Who, of course, definitely still will be. And so he wants to be able to say to them, look, I'm not a partisan, woke SJW Democrat. Like I'm Teamsters first. If Trump is our guy, I'm with him. If Democrats are the better path for us to go for our workers, that's where I'm going to go. So therefore, you should reelect me. In some ways, this is a gift to him because now, when he goes back to supporting Democrats, if he does in this election, which he'll do if he thinks they're going to win, is my guess. He can tell the Trump supporters in the union, I tried, and then they threatened to fire striking workers. What do you want me to do?
Right.
I can't, he crossed a red line. That's economic terrorism. I can't support that. So I think he actually, while it's humiliating for him, politically, it makes his situation less tenuous and less difficult than it was. Because I think a lot of people in labor recognize that he is in that tricky spot. Because of the significant support for Trump within the Teamsters union.
Right, and that's a really interesting point because that's not going anywhere. The significant support among Teamsters for Trump, rank and file, is not going anywhere because for
they'll be mad at that comment, but they'll be like, it's Trump.
It's Trump, because for the reason that so many rank and file Teamsters, other union members, blue-collar workers, Obama, Trump voters in the Rust Belt decided to vote for Donald Trump, A, some of them in the Republican primary, but B, in the general election over Hillary Clinton, really to your point about like the immediate material interests, that's part of it, but it's also this sense that he understands them and, hears the needs of people outside of the Beltway, and we could have a full show debating that. But it's a broader
support. When I say they, I mean the Trump diehards.
Right.
Like if you're already a Trump diehard, like he said, he can shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue. He can fire them. And they'll still be like, had to do what he had to do.
This is not the persuadable demographic.
Right.
At this point.
Hey, if you liked that video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Breaking Points.
If you want to see the rest of Counterpoints, go to breakingpoints.com to become a premium member and get the full uncut show every morning in your inbox and on Spotify.